Ever wonder why some prayers seem to hit an invisible ceiling while others break through to receive immediate answers? What if there was a hidden pattern, a code that unlocked guaranteed responses to prayer that most religious leaders aren't telling you about? The ancient prophet Daniel discovered something so powerful that it not only saved his life, but established a prayer method that works 100% of the time when followed correctly. And today, we're going to reveal the exact formula he used, a formula that's been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. Daniel wasn't just any biblical figure. He was a man who received such consistent divine responses that kings and emperors sought his counsel. Captured as a teenager and forced into Babylonian service, Daniel could have abandoned his faith. Instead, he refined a prayer practice so effective that it made him one of the most influential advisors to multiple pagan kings. What's truly fascinating is that Daniel didn't just pray occasionally. He developed a systematic approach that yielded consistent results throughout his entire life, spanning over 70 years in foreign service. Most people know Daniel from the lion's den story, but few understand what led to that dramatic showdown. Daniel's enemies weren't just randomly attacking him. They were specifically targeting his prayer method because they recognized its power. These high-ranking officials had observed something extraordinary about Daniel. His prayers consistently yielded accurate prophecies, divine wisdom, and supernatural favor. They knew that the source of his influence came from his connection to God, and they were determined to sever that connection. The core of Daniel's method revolves around three specific elements that modern readers often overlook. First, Daniel established an unbreakable rhythm, praying 3 times daily without fail. This wasn't just a suggestion. It was a disciplined practice that he maintained regardless of circumstances. Biblical scholars have noted that this threefold pattern aligned with the Jewish tradition of morning, afternoon, and evening prayers, but Daniel took it further by making it non-negotiable, even when facing death. This consistency created a spiritual momentum that most people never experience because they pray sporadically or only in emergencies. The second element of Daniel's code was his physical orientation. Scripture specifically mentions that he prayed toward Jerusalem with his windows open. This wasn't just sentiment, it was strategic alignment. Jerusalem represented the promises of God, the covenant, and the future hope of restoration. By physically orienting himself toward Jerusalem, Daniel was literally aligning himself with divine promises even while living in a foreign land. This physical alignment reinforced his mental and spiritual focus, creating a powerful circuit of intention that most modern prayer practices completely ignore. The third component was Daniel's posture. He knelt when he prayed. In an era when he served as one of the highest officials in the greatest empire on earth, Daniel humbled himself physically during prayer. This wasn't just tradition, it was a physical embodiment of his spiritual submission. Modern neuroscience has actually confirmed that physical posture affects mental state. By kneeling, Daniel was literally rewiring his brain for receptivity. This mind-body connection created the perfect conditions for divine communication, something casual or distracted prayer never achieves. When Daniel's enemies convinced King Darius to forbid prayer to anyone except the king himself, they knew exactly how to catch Daniel through his unwavering prayer routine. The decree was specifically timed for a 30-day period, knowing that Daniel wouldn't miss even one of his thrice daily sessions. What's remarkable is Daniel's response to this death trap. Scripture records that when Daniel learned about the decree, he went home and prayed as he had done previously. No panic, No special pleading, no deviation from his established method, just consistent application of the prayer code he had developed. This consistency in the face of mortal danger reveals something profound about Daniel's understanding of prayer. He recognized that effective prayer isn't about emergency interventions, but about established spiritual pathways. Like water that cuts through stone, not by force, but by consistent flow, Daniel's prayer method created deep channels of divine connection that could withstand any crisis. This explains why, when thrown into the lion's den, typically a death sentence carried out within minutes, Daniel experienced supernatural protection that left even the pagan king astonished. What happened after Daniel's deliverance is equally revealing, but often overlooked. King Darius not only recognized the power of Daniel's God, but issued a decree commanding reverence for the God of Daniel throughout his kingdom. This political validation came directly from the effectiveness of Daniel's prayer method. One man's consistent prayer practice literally changed the religious policy of the world's superpower. This wasn't just personal deliverance. It was kingdom influence flowing from a prayer method most believers have never fully implemented. What most religious scholars miss is the actual pattern found in Daniel's recorded prayers in chapter 9. When you analyze his words, a clear structure emerges. He begins with acknowledgement of divine character, moves to confession, then presents specific requests, and concludes with submission to divine will. This four-part pattern appears consistently throughout his prayers and forms the hidden code that guaranteed results. Most people completely skip over this structure, focusing instead on the dramatic stories rather than the prayer method that triggered them. Looking deeper at the first element, acknowledgement of divine character, we find something fascinating. Daniel didn't begin with his needs or problems. He started by recognizing who God is. In chapter 9, he addresses God as great and awesome and acknowledges his faithfulness to the covenant. This wasn't flattery, it was spiritual alignment. By focusing first on divine nature, Daniel was calibrating his mind and spirit to the higher reality he was addressing. Modern research in positive psychology confirms that beginning with gratitude and acknowledgement creates optimal mental conditions for problem-solving and receptivity, something Daniel understood thousands of years ago. The second element of Daniel's prayer structure, confession, is perhaps the most overlooked in modern prayer practices. Daniel didn't just confess his personal shortcomings, he identified with the collective failures of his people. This corporate confession created a spiritual honesty that cleared barriers to divine communication. What's remarkable is that Daniel himself was considered so blameless that his enemies couldn't find any accusation against him except his religious devotion. Yet in his prayer, he includes himself in the confession, saying, "We have sinned." This humility created a spiritual condition that modern research has shown increases neural coherence and receptivity, literally optimizing his brain for divine communication. The third component of Daniel's prayer pattern was specific, focused requests. Unlike vague or general prayers, Daniel presented clearly articulated needs. In chapter 9, he petitions for the restoration of Jerusalem and the end of his people's captivity, citing specific promises and prophecies. This precision created clear pathways for divine response. Neuroscience has demonstrated that specific, vivid mental images create stronger neural pathways than vague concepts. Daniel's prayer method was literally optimizing his brain's ability to receive and recognize answers when they came. The final element of Daniel's prayer code was submission to divine will. He concludes his petitions with acknowledgement of God's righteousness and mercy, surrendering the outcome to divine wisdom. This surrender wasn't passive resignation, but active alignment with higher purpose. Modern psychological research on the paradox of control confirms that surrendering outcomes while maintaining committed action creates optimal conditions for both performance and peace, exactly what Daniel's prayer method achieved. What makes Daniel's prayer method so powerful is that it transcends denominational boundaries because it's based on principles rather than specific religious traditions. The method isn't tied to any particular theology, but rather to a methodological consistency that creates optimal conditions for divine communication. It represents a universal spiritual approach that has proven effective across cultures, time periods, and religious backgrounds. The effectiveness of this prayer code doesn't come from manipulating divine will, but from aligning human consciousness with spiritual reality. When we adopt Daniel's systematic approach, consistency, orientation, posture, and structure, we're not forcing God's hand. We're positioning ourselves to recognize and receive what God is already doing. This explains why Daniel's prayers didn't just bring personal benefits, but kingdom advancement. They were perfectly aligned with divine purpose. What's particularly powerful about Daniel's prayer code is its applicability to modern life. In a world of constant distraction and spiritual confusion, Daniel's method offers a clear, structured approach to divine connection. The threefold daily rhythm provides stability in a chaos-driven culture. The physical orientation creates focus in an attention-deficit society. The kneeling posture counters the modern obsession with comfort and convenience. And the four-part prayer structure brings order to scattered thinking and emotional volatility. Perhaps the most overlooked aspect of Daniel's prayer method is its relationship to prophetic insight. Daniel wasn't just receiving answers to specific requests. He was being given divine perspective on world events and future developments. The most famous prophecies in the book of Daniel came through this prayer method, revealing that consistent application opens channels not just for personal answers, but for kingdom perspective. This explains why Daniel became indispensable to multiple kings. His prayer method gave him insight that transcended human intelligence and political calculation. But implementing Daniel's prayer code requires overcoming modern obstacles. The biggest challenge is the threefold daily commitment in a culture that values convenience and instant results. Daniel's method demands what few are willing to give: consistent, scheduled devotion, regardless of feelings or circumstances. The second challenge is the physical orientation and posture in a society that prioritizes comfort over effectiveness. And the third obstacle is maintaining the four-part prayer structure in a culture of emotional expression and unstructured spirituality. Overcoming the modern obstacles to implementing Daniel's prayer method isn't easy, but the potential rewards are immense. In a world dominated by distraction, inconsistency, and spiritual confusion, Daniel's approach offers a clear path to divine connection that has stood the test of time. The secret code of Daniel's prayer isn't mystical or magical, it's methodical. It combines unwavering consistency, proper orientation, physical humility, and structured content. When followed correctly, this ancient pattern creates the optimal conditions for divine response. The question isn't whether this method works. History has proven it does. The real question is, will you have the discipline to apply it consistently in your own life? But there's one final element of Daniel's prayer code that's often misunderstood. Daniel didn't pray this way to manipulate God or force divine action. He prayed this way because he understood that true prayer is not about changing God's mind, but about aligning human consciousness with divine reality. The consistency, orientation, posture, and structure weren't magical formulas. They were alignment practices that positioned Daniel to recognize and receive what God was already doing. This explains why Daniel's prayers didn't just bring personal benefits, but kingdom advancement. They were perfectly aligned with divine purpose. The secrets hidden in Daniel's prayer method have been preserving lives and transforming circumstances for thousands of years. The threefold daily discipline, the physical orientation towards spiritual promises, the humble posture, and the four-part prayer structure create a powerful code that unlocks divine communication in ways casual or inconsistent prayer never can. This ancient method remains available today for anyone seeking guaranteed answers to their prayers, a timeless approach to spiritual connection that continues to prove its effectiveness across generations.